Quick, honest question. On a scale from not at all to uncomfortably accurate, how does this statement land? I know I'm special because everyone keeps telling me so. Or this one, it's hard to get ahead without cutting corners here and there. Most people squirm a little at those. A few don't squirm at all. And for a long time, psychologists studying that second group treated it like three separate species of bad. Narcissists over here, psychopaths over there, the manipulators, the Machiavellians, somewhere else entirely. Three distinct flavors of darkness, filed neatly under one label, the Dark Triad. But a small team of researchers in Germany and Denmark wasn't convinced the story ended there. They went looking for something underneath all of it. A root system beneath the separate branches. What they found in 2018 was unsettling enough on its own. But it would take 4 more studies and almost a decade before anyone understood just how deep that root actually goes. Over a century ago, an English psychologist named Charles Spearman noticed something strange while grading intelligence tests. People who scored well on one kind of mental task tended to score well on completely different ones too. Not because the tasks were similar, but because something underneath all of them seemed to be doing the heavy lifting. He called it the G factor, a single underlying capacity that showed up in dozens of different disguises. That old idea is what gave a team led by psychologist Ingo Zettler at the University of Copenhagen their next move. If intelligence had a hidden common thread running through it, could the same be true of humanity's darker side? In 2018, they ran 4 separate studies on more than 2,500 people, measuring how strongly participants agreed with a set of deliberately uncomfortable statements. Alongside the 2 from the intro, there was, "I'll say anything to get what I want," and more bluntly, "hurting people would be exciting." The statements were designed to map 9 distinct dark traits: egoism, Machiavellianism, moral disengagement, narcissism, psychological entitlement, psychopathy, sadism, self-interest, and spitefulness. The traits were supposed to be 9 separate islands. Instead, the data kept doing the same thing over and over, pulling toward one shared foundation, underneath all of them. The researchers named that foundation D, short for the dark factor of personality. D isn't a specific behavior, it's closer to a disposition, a person's general willingness to prioritize their own benefit at the expense of others, and, crucially, to build the beliefs and justifications that make that feel reasonable, rather than cruel. Zettler put it simply, in any given person, D might show up mostly as narcissism, or mostly as psychopathy, or as some blend of several traits at once. The costume changes. The engine underneath doesn't. The team even built a public test so people could measure their own score, which, if you're the curious type, is either a fun rabbit hole or the last thing you want to know about yourself. But there's an obvious problem with claiming you found the common root of human darkness. Prove it isn't a fluke. Prove it isn't just how someone happened to answer a survey on one particular afternoon. So 3 years later, the same researchers came back to ask a much harder question. Most personality traits can drift. A stressful year at work can make anyone a little more self-serving. A toxic relationship can sand down someone's empathy for a while, and then it grows back. So when Zettler's team designed their next study, they weren't just asking whether D existed. They were asking whether it held. Published in 2021 in Social Psychological and Personality Science, the study tracked more than 1,200 adults over 4 full years, repeatedly measuring their D scores alongside the individual dark traits. And D didn't just hold up. It turned out to be the single most stable personality measure in the entire study, more consistent over time than narcissism on its own, more consistent than in psychopathy on its own, more consistent than any individual trait measured by itself. That's the detail that changes the whole picture. If narcissism can rise during a promotion and fade once the ego cools off, but D underneath stays essentially where it was 4 years earlier, then D isn't behaving like a mood. a phase, or a role someone happens to be playing this year. It's behaving like architecture. Something built early and left largely untouched by whatever life throws at it afterward. Less like weather, more like climate. Which raises an obvious next question. If this is baked in that deeply, does it quietly steer the actual decisions people make about their lives? More recently, a study covering more than 8,000 people across Germany, the United States, and Denmark went looking for exactly that. Not in surveys about beliefs, but in something far more concrete. Careers. The pattern that emerged was consistent across all three countries. People with high D scores were significantly less likely to end up working in the caring professions, teaching, nursing, therapy, and tellingly less likely to even want to in the first place. What makes this finding land differently than it might sound is what it isn't. Nobody is screening these people out at the interview stage. No institution is turning them away at the door. The sorting happens earlier and quieter than that. In the simple, largely unconscious calculation of what kind of work would actually suit them. Professions built around care demand a constant supply of exactly the thing D erodes, the instinct to put someone else's well-being ahead of your own convenience. So the people lowest in that instinct don't get filtered out of those rooms. They simply never feel pulled toward the door in the first place. It's a small, almost invisible kind of self-selection, happening across an entire population, and it raises an uncomfortable thought. The highest D people among us aren't necessarily anywhere dramatic or obvious. They might just be sitting quietly in whichever rooms don't require the one thing they're shortest on. But the most unsettling discovery in this whole decade-long hunt wasn't about individual people at all. It was about the places they live in. Everything up to this point paints D as a fixed personal trait, something that lives inside a person and barely moves for years at a time, which is exactly what makes the next finding so disorienting. A 2025 paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences looked at D not just person by person, but region by region, comparing entire countries and individual U.S. states against measures of how toxic the surrounding social conditions were, and a clear pattern emerged. Places with more corrosive social environments scored higher on collective measures of dark personality. Not just a few dark individuals living there. The average tilted darker across the whole population. At first glance, that seems to contradict everything the 4-year stability study just proved. But both things turn out to be true at once, just operating on different levels. D in any one person is remarkably fixed, a stable personal setting that doesn't move much once it's in place. But zoom out to an entire society, and the surrounding conditions still seem to shift where that dial tends to sit for the population as a whole. Nature builds the wiring. The environment around it can still nudge how dark, collectively, a place becomes. It's not the tidy, comforting answer either side of the nature versus nurture debate would prefer. It's something messier sitting in between. What this is actually good for, none of this research exists, just to make people uneasy at parties. Zettler has been direct about where the practical value lies. Understanding a person's D factor could eventually help in cases of extreme violence, corporate fraud, or repeated deception, giving psychologists a real tool for estimating how likely someone is to reoffend or to cause harm again, rather than guessing based on which specific dark label happens to fit them best. So go back to that opening question. The point was never to sort the world into dark people and everyone else. 9 traits, 1 shared root, and a spectrum every single person sits somewhere on. That's the actual finding. D just describes where on that spectrum you happen to land. And apparently, however fixed that number feels, the world around you still has some quiet say in it, which might be the most unsettling part of all. Not that darkness exists in some of us, that it's sitting on a dial, and the dial can still move.